class, can you hear me in the back row? Okay, excellent. So today, this is a presentation that's based on some work that I do in the College of Health and Biomedicine. I'm a learning designer in the college, and Dr. Pushpa Saneya, who is one of the academics that I work with, who actually couldn't be here because she's currently, unfortunately, taking class. So she couldn't be here, so I'm going to do the presentation for the both of us. And part of this presentation was to actually bring a learning design context as well as a content expert context into this presentation. So I'll try and wear both hats so that you can sort of get an idea of what it is that we were actually trying to achieve in these units. Now, as a brief introduction to myself, I am a learning designer. I'm also the blended learning coordinator in the College of Health and Biomedicine at Victoria University. And I tell people that I'm a recovering academic. And, so we can all hold hands and have a therapy session here. But in a previous lifetime, I used to be an academic before I realized that I really was interested in technology. I was interested in design. So I took the leap, some say over to the dark side, to actually become a learning designer. Put my money where my mouth is and actually start to look at the ways in which education and technology can, do all the wonderful things that they usually do. So this presentation is based on a case study in 2 first-year anatomy and physiology units that are actually currently running. We ran them in a burst mode over the summer semester, the summer trimester, I should say. And so we've got some data that I'll present to you later that came from that summer burst mode. But as I said, the actual rollout is currently happening in the semester 1 unit. So we're currently receiving data analytics, lots of user progress from those units. So this presentation, I'll briefly talk about the ideation phase. What was it that actually, what were some of the things that we took into consideration in sort of using this, in choosing H5P as a tool. Oops, sorry, spoiler alert, we used H5P. That was the consideration. That was the tool after much consideration that we decided to use. I'll also look at the design process that we developed to implement in these units. And then obviously I'll look at, I'll show you some graphs that we have of feedback that we've received thus far. So actually, before I go into the ideation phase, how many people have heard of H5P before and have used it? Great, excellent, so that's wonderful. So in terms of ideation, one of the first things that we do when we start to implement the blended learning project in the college is we actually have what we call a unit stock take. So we actually look at a unit and we talk to the unit coordinators about what is it that, what are the wicked problems in your unit? What are some of the things that you'd like to change, that you're actually having issues with, or that actually work well? So, sort of taking stock of what the unit is actually all about. And one of the things that the unit coordinator, Pushpa, at the time said was that she was really interested in fostering independent learning in the classroom, but also outside the classroom. So that was a really interesting concept that, that Pushpa sort of honed in on. The other thing that she was really interested in doing was looking at the placement of learning technology. Now, I don't know how many of you actually sort of are involved in, the disciplines of anatomy and physiology or health and biomedicine, but there's some amazing, amazing sort of technology out there. And, a lot of our keynote speakers have presented, have shown us like little anatomical, images of the ear hair on fleas and, the nose hair on rats, and it's just amazing, what technology exists. So Pushpa was really interested in sort of harnessing this technology. We have what's called anatomy TV that the students already use. So it was sort of trying to marry a few different aspects of the learning technology as it existed. They actually use a textbook, and students have learning interactives in the textbook that they, that they sort of use separately. So it was sort of in this environment, what was it that we could do in the actual unit itself that would add value to the learning experience? So obviously one of the things that was really important was to facilitate learning by active participation. So the old idea of active learning, well, it's not an old idea, but it's something that we place a lot of importance on. It's one of sort of the principles that we follow for blending in the college. So obviously we wanted to design and develop learning activities that promoted higher level thinking and knowledge and skills. But also we wanted to recognize the importance of individual learning styles, because that was something that is really important. In this day and age, students learn in such a myriad of different ways. They access information in so many different ways. It was something that it was sort of almost trying to make sense of it all, trying to make sense of the whole thing. So what were the considerations that what were some of our considerations in picking a product that could do all of those things in the conversation that we had at the unit stock take? So one of the things obviously was something that we wanted to implement in blended learning. So it had to be a combination of technology, enhanced tools, but also something that could be used in the face-to-face classroom situation, because it was about that true blend of technology and face-to-face learning. There had to be, and this provides students with the flexibility of pace, and time. It had to be mobile friendly, because obviously that's, a lot of our students are accessing information in that way these days. It had to be easy to create and use. No plugins, no large SCORM packages, blah, 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 blah. Sort of the technical list was quite long. But it's really, I'd like to actually highlight the aspect of no large SCORM packages, because that's something that, from having been an articulate storyline user, and having those large SCORM packages, that can sometimes be quite clunky. And if you have users that are not very experienced in creating those large SCORM packages, that can even be a bigger issue. So that was something that we wanted to not keep clear of, but that was a major consideration in the solution. We also needed an LTI integration. Our LMS is called VU Collaborate, and it has a lot of learner analytics. VU Collaborate is it's basically D2L, Desire to Learn, by Brightspace. So we needed something that would integrate with that system, talk to our gradebook, send us a lot of user analytics back to our LMS. The other consideration to keep in mind was we don't have a very big budget. I don't know if you know about Victoria University's situation at the moment. We're getting rid of a lot of staff. We don't have a big budget. So we needed something where, one of us, or we have a learning designer that's based in every college, one learning designer for hundreds of staff. So we actually needed something that was staff capacity building, that staff could actually do themselves. We could train them for maybe 1 or 2 hours, and then hopefully they would go on to create these resources themselves. They wouldn't have to constantly come back to us for, to create content for them, basically. And of course, as I said, budget. It had to be open source and cheap, hopefully free. Now, this was the challenge that was set. Challenge accepted. So what we used was actually H5P. And if you go on the website, you'll probably see a lot of H5P allows you to create learning interactive. So it's a way to create various, it's a way to make content interactive. And it has over 30, I think it has over 50 tools now that can be used, but some of the tools that H5P has that you can use to create content include things like course presentation, which, by the way, our unit coordinators love course presentation, and I think it's because it takes them to the safe space of PowerPoint. It's it's something that is warm and fuzzy, and it reminds them of PowerPoint. And yeah, they can include a few learning interactives in there, but it's not very different. There's interactive video, which if you were at Peter Mello's session this morning where he was talking about creating videos, that is a really interesting opportunity, because he talked about video again being sort of a passive experience, and this is where you can actually make that passive experience a little bit more interactive. So within the interactive video tool, you can actually take a video that you've created or a video from YouTube or a copyright license-free video, upload it onto the H5P learning video interactive tool, insert interactives in it. In about 5 minutes, you've got an interactive video. Some of the other sort of tools that we see unit coordinators using are the timeline feature, which sort of is a slider. It's the old slider activity. You can slide through. There's also drag and drop, image hotspots, drag the words, fill in the blanks, questionnaire, all of those wonderful old things. If you're on the H5P website, you can have a look at some of the other tools that are also available. So this is what we looked at in terms of creation. Now I can actually go into a whole other presentation about the LTI integration and how we actually managed to get H5P to talk to VU Collaborate. But if you're interested, our team actually received an honorable mention, that's it, an honorable mention in the ACODE TEL Award for Technology Enhanced Learning, and our H5P LTI integration. There's about a 10-minute video on their website that you can access to see how the integration actually works. But today I'm going to actually focus on the design, because I'm a designer and I like to talk on and on and on about design. But I thought one of the ways in which I could show you how the actual, how we managed to use H5P in the creation of content rather than H5P, the tool itself. Some of the key concepts that we kept in mind when we used in the design process was obviously interaction, making sure that the activities, going back to the unit stock take phase where we had the unit coordinator say that she was very interested in promoting self-regulated learning. So, obviously giving self-regulation, active learning, and flexibility. The key features, one of the things that Pushpa was really interested in was a way in which she could communicate with the students, so feedback. And, it's really interesting. The previous presenter talked about the students wanting clarity and really appreciating feedback. And that's something that Pushpa really was interested in as well, is a way for her to provide feedback to students. And obviously follow a pedagogical process, be problem-based, because this was anatomy and physiology. I work with people that are very outcomes-focused, problem-based learning aficionados. But also be quite reflective, so that students would have the opportunity to reflect on what they were learning. The key elements in the design were chunking, more chunking, because I'm a great believer in, sort of small snippets of information that students could go away, they could complete a learning interactive, go away, make a cup of tea, come back, and go to the next interactive without actually timing out or, having to go back and come in, log out, log in, and, do all of those other annoying things that we have to do when information isn't chunked for us. Providing very clear instructional text. This was something else that was very, very key in the design process. I'll show you an example of what all of this looks like in the next slide, for those of you that are not fans of text. Target key learning outcomes, so actually looking at what the learning outcomes were for the unit and making sure that the activities actually targeted those. And look, there may be only 4 or 5 learning outcomes for the unit, and every activity doesn't have to target all of the learning outcomes, but even if you can sort of, make a map of which learning outcomes, which activities could use, actually looking at the look and feel. And this is really important. As a designer and as someone that is a consumer of, current information, we know that students are looking at really nicely produced online material. And so actually, making sure that the look and feel of the material was an important consideration. A lot of people think it's it's not related to content, it's not important, but it is, because that's visual communication is a really important part of learning, because that's the first thing students see, that's how they access information. So that was something that was a really important consideration as well. And did I mention chunking? Yes, I did. So I'll go through, so this is actually what an activity looks like within our LMS space. So we have modules that have actual activities that are designed within them. This is the actual chunked individual activity, so you'll see that it's very focused. It's actually only related to one particular subtopic within a topic. Here they're talking about the organelle. There's so many new words and terms that I've learned since I've been in health and biomedicine. I'm a sociologist by trade, so this is a whole new area of inquiry for me. That's our instructional text, so what I was talking about previously, giving the students an introduction, telling them what they need to do, providing them with a hint. So this actually is where you can link back to the unit material or link back to the learning outcomes that I was talking about before. So saying to students, maybe read this part of the textbook or read this before you complete this activity. That is the actual H5P Learning Interactive that sits within the LMS space. And then that's the feedback section. So once students actually enter their answer into that field, they can actually click the check button. And that's where they'll be told whether they were correct or incorrect. And if the unit coordinator has put in more information, they'll actually be told if they were incorrect, why they were incorrect, and what they need to do, which is probably finding the hint if they were really onto it. So that was, sorry, I moved on that very quickly. Did you want me to stay on that for another second for you to take it all in, or are you happy for me to move? This is a flashcards activity. So it's actually, they'll put in the answer and then the answer will be provided to them. So in terms of contextualizing it, I've talked about blended learning again and again. So there were two things that we had to keep in mind for a true blend. One was making sure that the students could actually access this activity in class, but also pre-class and post-class. So that was where we actually looked at a proper blended learning approach. And what we used for the face-to-face or in-class sessions was a process-oriented guided inquiry learning. I always mess up that. I've practiced this about 5 times and I still messed it up. That's okay. You get, that's why we have PowerPoint, right? So this is an example. Pushpa actually pointed me to this approach because this is something that they have been using in their face-to-face sessions for quite a long time, and it's been known to be good for. It's been known to show results for physiology students in particular. So the H5P activities were inserted into the activities modules in unit spaces. So that's what I showed you previously, where all the activities sits. There were actually modules where all the activities sat. And what we told students to do was to actually be exposed to the H5P activities prior to class. Now that exposure could be anything. It could be going in, looking at it and going, oh yeah, there's an activity, and going out with your friends and never coming back to your LMS ever again. Or it was actually completing the activity prior to class. But then what we did was that we used the guided inquiry, there you go, I'm messing it up again, the POGIL approach, and actually made students use team-based inquiry. That's easier to say. Use team-based inquiry within the classroom so that the actual online activity, so the H5P that they were completing online, was connected to the team-based guided inquiry that they were doing in class. And I'll show you an example of what this is. So this was the Online Learning Interactive, our favorite course presentation, yet again. So this is an example. So this is one of the, this is pointing to somewhere. This is one of the pages that you can create within course presentation. So there we have students click on these blue buttons here, and they get some information about generation of action potential. And then when they came into the classroom, students were actually asked to complete in teams the same activity. So we have the same sort of graph. Those were the terms that students learned. previously, and then they were asked a series of questions. So students could choose to actually do this prior to class. The really good students did complete this prior to class, or they could sit as a group of 2 or 3 students. They could sit together in the classroom, open their laptops or their mobile devices or whatever they had with them, and actually complete this activity in class to then complete that activity. So it was sort of, complementing the face-to-face time that staff had with them. So it was a really, we don't really like to call it a flipped model, because really it's I don't know, maybe it's beyond flipping. It's sort of making sure that students have a way to access information in multiple ways. So if students were more comfortable with discussion and actually sitting in class and doing this, they could do that. If students weren't comfortable doing that, they could just complete the H5P and not even show up in class. They also had, very importantly, they also had the chance to complete this post-class. And that was what we found was really important for their review. So before exams, we saw, using our user analytics, we saw that their access of H5Ps increased exponentially before exams. Feedback thus far from students. So we conducted some focus group discussions. We also gave students a questionnaire. Now this, as I said, this is actually currently being rolled out in the anatomy and physiology unit. So the data that I'm presenting to you is from our burst mode, which only had about 30 students in the class. So it's not a lot of data, but we have currently about 360 odd students enrolled in that unit, so we'll have really good data. Hopefully at the next THETA conference I'll present some other data for you. But look, how would you rate your effort? So the question that we asked students was, how would you rate your effort when completing the online modules? Now the students would probably see this as a negative, a lot of effort, but our team actually saw this as a positive, in that they were actually completing these modules. They perceived them as being a lot of effort, so we're hoping effort equals learning. I don't know. We'll find out. But the second question was interesting, because they said, we asked them, as a result of your enrollment in the supplementary module, indicate the level of improvement you made in your bioscience content knowledge. And the improvement was exponential. So it's really interesting how the effort was related to improvement. And that's not new. That's something that we sort of already knew. Another question we asked was, how often did you repeat or do these modules? And that was really interesting, that we thought they'd do them at least once, but really it was twice or thrice that they were, that seemed to be the amount of time that they were spending on each module. So that was another win. They were going back and repeating these modules and doing them again. Did they align with your unit content? That sort of, yes, that's good, that's what it needs to do. But this is a resounding success. This is where we saw that, will these modules be helpful in units you study in the future? And we had 100% of respondents say yes. So this really showed to us that chunking learning, providing them with an opportunity to interact with the content, not only online, but also face-to-face. So actually blending that content seemed to be what worked for our cohort of students. It'd be interesting to see if it works with other cohorts of students, but certainly in terms of the cohort of students that we have in this burst mode, it was very successful. And I found it really interesting that they said that it would help them in their study for future units. So they weren't only looking at it in terms of passing the exam or passing this unit, but they were taking that bioscience knowledge with them to other units. So that's something that we found really interesting. And that was really interesting for us in terms of our curriculum design, because then we started to look at actual courses, and we said, what H5P interactives can we embed in different courses so that students aren't doing the same thing in every unit. So the Bachelor of Paramedicine units, for example, students, for example, could do particular learning interactives in one unit and then different learning interactives in other units. So we could start looking at course design rather than just individual unit design, which is, the concept of operating in silos that that we're trying to break free of. In terms of a few conclusions, we're going to continue this work, as I said, in the next iterations of the unit. We're definitely going to continue following the principles of active participation and then finding innovative ways to achieve this. But also, promoting higher order thinking. And obviously that, promoting higher order thinking and designing content and designing assessment in a way that promotes that has been the key challenge for us. Because H5P was developed by Jubal in Norway. It's used in Norwegian primary and secondary schools. So it's something that, is used not at a tertiary level. We've actually been using it in the tertiary context in Australia. So it's really interesting because they have, quite basic concepts. So how do we, basic learning interactive, so how do we use these sort of, what are traditionally seen as basic fill in the blanks or drag and drop or match the columns? How can we use these activities to promote higher order thinking, to actually promote critical thought? And perhaps it's not as important in the first year units, but this is something that we're definitely considering for the second and third year units, because that's where we actually start to see a development of that critical analysis. And that's what we're hoping, that the next phase of this project will do, is actually, start to look at that development of those higher order skills. And of course, continue to meet the challenges and experiment in this brave new world of learning and teaching. Now, I looked online a lot for quotes from Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, which is one of my favorite books, and that's why I had to bring in the title into this presentation, and I couldn't find a quote for you. So I'll have to just leave it at that. Thank you. Are there any questions? I don't want to keep you from your tea, so I'm happy to talk to you, but yes. Yeah. Yes. 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 We've used it as a replacement for storyline. So, yeah, I would say definitely for, Camtasia, because it can do some of that sort of interactivity, video interactivity, it can do. Yeah, it can do as well. That's why it's the brave new world. Yes. It was really interesting. I spent a whole day learning how to do there's about 30, 40 activities. So I spent about a day playing around with different activities. There's also an activity called where you can create a game. So you can actually, there's a whole game that can be created. That takes a little bit longer to get your head around. But I would say not more than a day to become, I'd like to call myself an expert user, but, that's for others to judge, not for me. But yeah, and I think it's practice. Like with any new tool, it's the more you use it, the easier it becomes. And I think that's why a lot of our staff have used course presentation, because that's something that they know that it's their world. But it's a very easy, self-explanatory, linear sort of interface. If you've had a chance to log into H5P, you'll see it's a really easy way to create some, interesting content.